morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Jaws Bites. I am your host, Chris Joslin, here to just chat with you a little bit, as always, about some of the things that are going on in our industry today. An industry that's becoming more and more important, not just to people growing and learning in the transportation logistics industry, but to those of you out there that are looking in from the outside and wondering, what in the hell is going on with the transportation world, nationwide, geographically closer to you, or even worldwide? And there's always something going on. There's always something to look at and talk and participate in. So we invite you to join us, as always, at iLevelLogistics.com. Be part of the community. Be part of the word that we spread. Be part of the conversation that we have. Be part of the answers to the questions that we're looking to solve. So welcome again to this edition of Jaws Bites. Quite some time ago for those of you my age, but even longer ago for those that are younger in the millennial group and beyond, there was a famous boxer named Cassius Clay who changed his name to Muhammad Ali, of course, but he had a famous saying, which was, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, and man, he could do it. He was something else to watch, and his defense of his title and his capturing of the title in the first place was surreal for a guy his size, as a matter of fact. And pound for pound, still considered one of the best boxers of all time, if not the loudest mouth boxer of all time, for sure. But what he was trying to tell us all, which we should all be listening to today in the logistics industry in general, is that it's time to be nimble. It's time to be quick. It's time to not play rope-a-dope and act like there's something coming in getting prepared for something we know is coming, because we don't know anymore. The ideas behind having the right crystal ball and seeing what's coming ahead of us has grown more and more difficult. The crystal ball is very cloudy. The dark clouds that I spoke about last time we were on the air together are getting denser. They're gathering in the distance, and whether they blow away from you or blow towards you is really dependent on the amount of preparation you decide to take, I believe. So, for today, I thought we'd just take a few minutes and discuss a couple of things that are going on. One of the very interesting things that we looked at on the daily just the other day is a discussion about the regulations that seem to be, regulations and technology seem to be growing quite a bit, but is road safety actually worsening? And the DAT has come up with some articles to go over some things about traffic fatalities in general. The National Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, projects that an estimated 42,000, almost 43,000 people, just under 43,000 people died in motor vehicle traffic accidents, crashes last year. That's about 10.5% increase from the previous year. Now, of course, they don't go into great depth as to what the conditions are. In other words, the difference between the drivers on the road in 2020, 2021 versus 2022, this range. So it'll be real interesting to try to dig underneath those numbers. And as someone told me years and years ago in a statistics class when I was going to undergrad school, those that own the statistics know how to spin them. And the spin rooms are abundant, often and all the time, especially if you're on any kind of social media platform looking at different things or listening to podcasts like me, because I have my biases as well, my thoughts about technology, regulations, etc., which I think are all very important to increasing our ability to transact business in a profitable, a ethical, and a forward-thinking manner. But I think it's imperative that many of us take some time to kind of peel back the onion and look at what's below the surface on some of these issues. And that's one of them that I think is necessary to look at, because if you've listened to any of my podcasts before, or you want to go back and to listen to some, you will know that I am very much understanding why we have regulations, but I am also very much in favor of less of them. I think it puts the entrepreneurial spirit, the small enterprise system of business in the United States, which is still the predominant number of people in the U.S. work for small, mid-sized businesses. It's changing. There's a move going to consolidation to larger and larger entities. And the fact is that a lot of that has to do with the money needed for technological advancements and the requirement of a certain amount of density of capital, a certain amount of density of business to be able to overcome what I believe is burdensome regulations. Now, state to state, that's different. I lived in California for most of my life, certainly almost all of my business life. And you can see, as I've mentioned many times before, that California is pretty much the tip of the spear on these kinds of issues around the technological advances there are, the contributions to society, to the environment, et cetera, that they bring us, but also to the fact that there is a bar that is set, a benchmark that is set for businesses and people to reach to meet certain standards of, using an example, air quality standards, et cetera. And once those things are even coming close to being reached, the bar is moved. And that's not uncommon. That's how a orderly prescription for advancement in our society creates itself. But it's also very difficult. And again, lends itself to the structure. Those that have made it to a certain level can overcome those challenges and gain a larger piece of the part of the pie of business that is out there, or be forward in the growing of that pie. So when we look at statistics, and I just mentioned this one about road safety, because everything from hours of service to electronic log data to the technologies used to schedule railroads, the timing of train starts and stops and availabilities and everything that goes on, and even the steamship lines and what happens on the ocean and slowing and speeding them up to get to different ports, the deepening of different ports to enable larger and larger ships to come in. All these things are wonderful in terms of creating a world economy. But anything that comes along, even minor, can expose the vulnerabilities and expose the ability of something like this to be disrupted very, very quickly. Last year, during the episode of the Ever Given in the Suez Canal, we talked about that at length, and how that situation and the structural engineering of the canal itself to accommodate certain sizes, and the precise nature on which you had to move from one end of that canal to another didn't allow the tolerance level for a disruptive situation that occurred there. And that's why you had a ship grounded for the time it was, and all the all the consequential elements of what happened because of that. And that was just one single ship, and there was a large disruption. I think it was a harbinger of things to come, because the pandemic in general, ports being shut down, and like right now, Shanghai, if you look like at a world map, you'll see just a crowd in the sea of Japan and around Shanghai and all that entire area, just almost solid of ships that are waiting to get out of there. And it's not necessarily because the ports themselves were completely shut down, though that was part of the latest round of COVID shutdowns. The main issue around that was not the ports themselves, but the manufacturers backlogging everybody and shutting down their plants. So there is another tsunami of challenges coming our way for imports and consequently exports, and the chassis involved, and the inland distribution, and the mechanisms at the ports of entry and ports of exit in this country, and all the dynamics. A lot of people are thinking about these things. A lot of people are doing things, but the things they are thinking about are not holistic in nature. They're the way companies in particular look to overcome these challenges is how the first question they ask is, how do we get what our board and what our constituency and what our shareholders require to happen. And if they can answer those questions, they're not answering them in a holistic, uh, transportation, logistics industry manner, they're answering them in a manner that's conducive to get their product to the shelves faster, to get their interests ahead of all others. And while that is admirable and part of our society and part of the way we've grown in a nature of capitalism, it does not help the industry as a whole. Somebody told me the other day that we're going from a just-in-time, very efficient kind of supply chain structure to a just-in-case one. And I thought that was very well put, because just-in-case means you have to. There's always been contingency planning. If you look at think tanks, if you look at different associations, if you look at different compilations of businesses, they look to discover the what if scenarios. They look to discover how to solve those scenarios if they will happen. The governments do that for a living. There are white papers in every cataclysm that could possibly happen, and the contingencies and the models and what to do if this happens, and if this happens we do this, and if that happens we do that, et cetera, et cetera. And it often fuels conspiracy theories, et cetera, because somebody will discover a white paper on what if a meteor hits tomorrow, what would we do? And FEMA would do this, and the government would go underground here, and all this kind of thing. So when something bad does happen, people will look back at that and say, see, somebody knew already. Well, somebody didn't know. Somebody was playing the just in case. Now we are saddled in the industry with looking at that. Just in time is the way we want to be. If you read about the Toyota Way, or if you're a Six Sigma black belt or something along those lines, you know that efficiency drives competitive fuel. It drives entrepreneurialism. It drives new technologies. It drives just the nature of getting things from earth to finished goods to your dinner table. But there's not enough play in that for any kind of volatile disruptions. So now we have to consider the alternative to that. And the alternative to that is assuming a certain amount of a major disruption that has a cascading effect across the industry. So when we do that, we are moving to a just-in-case scenario, a just-in-case philosophy. And I think that's going to be a necessary part of everything we do from now on. I don't have any answers to that, except that, the way most people initially look at that is you have to have a larger buffer of dollars or attainable credit lines to facilitate padding against those disruptive situations that occur. And they're not existential to any company or any industry if you have the protections put in place to manage those. Now, from a very localized standpoint, from the standpoint of a company itself, those protections are your margin. And from an industry perspective, it's almost like you have to have a fallback contingent second or third rail way of conducting business to allow those disruptions not to hinder what you're trying to do moving forward. So the best way I can put this, I think, is to order your priorities correctly. I think as an industry, we don't do that at all. Very, very rarely. From a company standpoint, both vendors and retail companies, there is a great deal of consideration around that. And we have, certain key performance indicators, KPIs, that companies look at to determine which bucket of manufacturing or shipping or transport or return logistics or, it's all these different aspects of business in general. They look at priorities that move the needle in the direction they need to for those things that are determined as important. The one thing that does not help that is public company determinations. Because as I can tell you from personal experience working with a very large company, is that long-term is very, very important, but secondary to short-term expectations, short-term drive for growth. Quarter to quarter, there is a need to disclaim to the public, to the the shareholders, which is you and me and every 401k owner out there, how a company is doing statistically to show that it is progressing in a way that is going to be beneficial not only to the company itself but to the shareholders. That is hugely important and drives a lot of what we do. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley came around after Enron situation years and years and years ago, and required a certain amount of disclosures, a certain amount of things going. Very important for transparency's sake. But having said that, oftentimes the priorities are lining up with short-term instead of long-term gain. And short-term gain oftentimes means, while very efficient, oftentimes means cutting corners for the sake of that short-term gain to show that the company is progressing in the manner that it wants to. Well, that does the opposite of what we were talking about a few moments ago. That does the opposite of sustaining a baseline that is higher and has a buffer built into it to sustain the volatility that occurs when you go from a class 1 river to a class 5 falls. If those out there have gone rafting, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You don't want to run into a class 5 falls in a canoe. You want to be prepared for something like that. You want to have professionals with you so that when you get thrown out of the boat, somebody can retrieve you very quickly. And that's the way it's felt over the last couple of years. We can blame it on a lot of things. We can blame it on regulations, administrations, volatility, politics, international disruptions and wars and supply chain stuff. And of course, we can blame it on pandemics. The reality is the answers to blame it on is all of those. But the finger, anytime you point it at someone, as the old saying goes, there's 3 fingers pointed back at you, right? And if that's the case, then we have to look to ourselves and decide that what we've done over the past 40, 50 years of putting the infrastructural pieces around how we manage our supply chain and trying to minimize the chains, etc., may be the wrong method for the next decade or so. Because there needs to be a new baseline. There needs to be a just-in-case thinking that goes into determining how to take your steps to have the right amount of inventories on hand, to have the right amount of raw materials, to have the right distribution of modalities when you're shipping things so that you're not caught with not enough inventory or not enough raw materials to manufacture or not enough personnel because you've downsized or right-sized or retrenched or whatever the saying may be these days. I think, and it's not you throwing, you meaning a company throwing all its dollars at making every driver a multimillionaire or making every thing that everybody believes was an underpaid or undervalued position suddenly extraordinarily valuable. They're all valuable. They always have been, and there's reasons that they should have been paid more. There's reasons that they should be paid the same, and everything in between. And that depends on the priorities of the companies and the entities involved. Suffice to say, all of this, and the most important thing I wanted to bring up today, is all of these things I'm talking about to dissuade the constant barrage of attacks that we have on our structure, to mitigate that, to formulate a possible path that smooths out the potholes that we've been running into. We need to have the ability to fall back in 2 ways. Certainly money is one of them. Having dollars and cents to contribute to those times when we need those extra dollars and cents to ride out the storm is very important. But the second part is having the understanding, the acumen, and the knowledge and wherewithal to ride that wave and not get buried in the surf. To find a way to get from one spot to another, not just retaining your company, not just maintaining your business the way it is, but putting yourself in a position to contribute to the larger picture and financially gain yourselves as well. No, I think, as I've said, most of the times I've talked about, I don't really have the answers to these things. And there are a lot of people right now that are advantaging themselves by, if they own some assets, or if they have um, if they have equipment, or they have a commodity that is less available, then they're being intelligent enough to charge more for that. Some people will tell you they're gouging, etc., and there's certainly parts of that occur. But they would say, those that are making that extra dollar, extra more than $1 on their assets right now, are saying they're making up for years and years of being too tight and barely making it, because we were driving toward a just-in-time scenario instead of a just-in-case scenario. And that the money that they build up now, if managed properly, will be that buffer that they need to get them through the next just-in-case challenge that comes along. And they always do. I mean, we're moving right now into a time of considerable and unforeseen and growing inflation. When you measure the numbers that are put out, the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, and the Producer Price Index, things like that, you've got to remember that those are put together by the people that are managing the numbers and pushing out the information to you and I. Those are numbers that are put together by people that they're wanting to show that things aren't as volatile as maybe you and I believe they are. So you can almost guarantee that inflation of any kind and these numbers of any kind are worse than is being dictated to us. Because there are people that select a basket of goods, just using the Consumer Price Index for instance. There are people that put together a smattering of products, foods, grocery items, etc. Usually they don't include fuel and things like that at all, by the way. But they're a basket of 50 items. I don't know what the number is, but let's say it's 50 items. Well, those are selected, and they're graduated in such a way as to give a final combined number. Things are left out, things are put in. It's not arbitrary. It's done with intent, and it's done to make sure we all don't freak out about what's really happening. Because anybody that's gone to the grocery store knows some things are not on the shelf, some things are twice as expensive, some things are just the way they were, or some things are the same price as what they were, but then you realize the bag or the package is smaller than it used to be, which is a common way of getting around that. I think it's called shrinkation or something like that. I don't remember the term that's given for that. But back to and to try to draw and tie a little bow around this, I started this out by talking about, float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. And I think Nimble logistics it's where it's at now. It has to be. We have to be more nimble. We have to be just in case thinking instead of just in time thinking, until we have the kind of business environment that is profitable enough and sound enough and has enough backstops of structure to it that we know we can survive. That doesn't mean you, as the old saying does, that doesn't mean you build the church for Easter, right? Because if you build a church for Easter, your church is empty a lot. That's why they talk about it that way. So you have to be intelligent about that, but you have to be able to survive and thrive. Survive and thrive. So nimble logistics, just in case thinking, survive to thrive, float like a butterfly, but then when you're ready to, you sting like a bee. And nobody will see you coming if you get it right. Well, as always, I invite you guys to be part of the community, to go to iLevelLogistics.com and talk to us. See us on all the platforms: YouTube, Rumble, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Listen to the daily bites that are just little blurbs about what we see on the daily. Subscribe to the daily. You can get an email coming to you every day that has short headlines that are curated from all over the industry. You have some things that are put together by me and the staff to outline and draw some graphs around some things. You get to learn some more, whether you're inside the industry or you're outside the industry looking to peer inside something that's become vitally important to us, we encourage you to be part of this forward-thinking group. A forward-thinking group that wants to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. We'll see you next time on Jaws Bites.